You are listening to the Mom to Mom podcast, hosted by Stephanie Sinclair, founder and owner of How2Mom. This podcast is meant to empower women and bring the community together through storytelling and education. During these episodes, you will hear stories of triumph, heartache, and hope. You will hear time-tested tips and tricks shared by mamas and women. You will hear a variety of birth stories that will resonate with all birthing families, advice from professionals who have dedicated their teachings to pregnancy, birth, and moms. Here, you will find encouragement, support, and community, because we are your community, and we are so happy to have you. Now, on to today's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. I am so excited to start sharing birth stories with all of you. I think it's so important to have such a great variety of birthing women share their stories. And I am really, really excited about today's guest. She is a How2Mom client, become really great friend, and just a beautiful person to have not only in my life, but just a part of the How2Mom family. So I'm so thankful for her willingness to come on today and share her birth story, not only about the actual day her beautiful son was born, but kind of leading up to his birth and the journey that they were on, and finding a birth team that they trusted, that they felt empowered by. And also, I want to talk with her a little bit too about her provider choice. Our guest today does have a heart condition that played a role in selecting a provider through her birth journey. And so I think her story is really going to touch a lot of you today. Actually, I know it's going to touch a lot of you today, but I also think for those of you that might be in this box of a high-risk birthing mom, I think her story is really going to empower you to ask the right questions and will lead you to a beautiful birth journey that she also got to experience and that she deserves. So Mercedes is our guest today. She is such a beautiful human. And like I said, we've become really great friends, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds, because birth has changed her like it has changed many of us. So thanks so much for being on today, Mercedes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm already tearing up. So this might be emotional.
I know it is. Birth just in general is emotional, and especially when we can process and relive. But I think that is the realest side of it that we need to share, and we need to let other families know that that's not a bad thing to feel emotions. And when we think about our birth story, and there's so much good that can come out of sharing our stories, but also just hearing from other people. So Mercedes, I'm going to kind of let you take the lead today, because the people are here for you. They want to hear your story. But I think the best way to start is to just kind of talk about your journey through pregnancy. What led you to want to hire a birth doula? Because it was a little bit later in your pregnancy. And kind of how did that process go for you?
Yeah. So I had a friend that became a doula a couple summers ago, and I had always heard of them. I've had a lot of friends that have had babies. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I have little brothers who are 20 years younger than me, so I kind of grew up almost raising them. And I always thought that it would maybe be something that I would look into, but I didn't know a ton about it. I just had heard the term, I guess.
Super common.
Yeah. So throughout pregnancy, I had a provider who I thought was great. I mean, I actually had a miscarriage before getting pregnant with my son. And the provider that I just happened to go to, it was early on. And the provider that I went to was so warm. She was so caring. So she just I felt very taken care of in something that is a hard thing to go through. And so I stuck with her. I got pregnant right away after my miscarriage with my son and stuck with that provider. And yeah, so that's kind of how I found my initial provider.
Yeah,
Um,
which makes sense. Like sometimes, unfortunately, that's not people's experience when they go through a miscarriage and it almost feels
yeah.
really, I don't know, very medical and closed. And so I can completely understand with that warm, comforting hand that that felt like the right place to be.
Yeah, and I had never met her before. That was the
Okay.
first time that I met her was when I went in for that. So I stuck with her with the pregnancy, my second pregnancy, which was the pregnancy with my son. Bodie is his name,
So
and
cute. The best, most unique. I love a good unique name.
yep, me too. My name's Mercedes.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so fast forward a little bit, about halfway through my pregnancy, I would say, we started talking about, what birth would look like with my heart condition. So I have a heart condition. It's genetic, it's pretty rare. It's called ARVC. And it's developed later in life, like through endurance exercise. So they weren't worried about Bodhi
Hmm.
having anything or having any issues right away. Um, we actually still have not done a genetic test, but we can do that at any moment and know if he has that genetic predisposition.
Okay.
But they were worried about me. I do have a defibrillator, and so that automatically made me high risk.
Hmm.
And both my heart doctor, who's an electrophysiologist, him and my OB at the time wanted me to see a specialist. So I went through Minnesota Perinatal and I got on a Zoom call and it was
Yeah.
me and like five doctors or something. And it was early in the morning after working an overnight shift. And so I was just kind of like going through the motions, like, okay, these doctors need to be there. They wanted to monitor my heart during delivery, which my mom actually has this heart condition as well. So they did that too. They just monitor you a little bit stricter than the
Yeah.
average mom. And so we were talking and talking and talking, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is all pretty standard, things that I've heard before. Um, and then at the end, they were like, and we want to minimize pushing, so you're going to use vacuum and forceps. And I was like,
Mm,
um, what? Like I woke up, right? Because
right.
I was sleepy from my overnight shift, and I
Right.
was like, oh, hold on. And I was kind of shocked. So
And I think the biggest thing too, when we talked initially, like it wasn't a question, it wasn't a
no,
conversation, it wasn't a, hey, our patient, how do you feel about this? These are the risks, these are the benefits. It was just like a, oh, and by the way, before we hang up,
yes. And that is
boom.
exactly how it was right at the end of the conversation where I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked them why. I was like, well, I don't understand why that's necessary. I'm, you know, healthy otherwise besides the
Mm-hmm.
heart condition. And my heart condition is very stable. I've never been shocked by my defibrillator. It has paced me a
Right.
few times, but like relatively very stable.
Right.
And they told me that pushing would be so painful that it would cause stress on my heart. And I'm like, have any of you ever gone through labor? Like,
Right.
so
Yes.
anyways, um, so I went back to my OB and had a conversation with her, and she kind of said the same thing. And she was just like, this is what they're recommending. This is what we're going to do. And I'm like, but can't I try? Like,
Right.
I just kept asking her, can't I try
Right.
before we jump to all these conclusions?
Right.
And I knew in my gut, I wasn't full on, needing an unmedicated birth,
Right.
but I wanted to do it kind of as unmedicated and physiological, natural as possible.
Right. And you want
So,
to see how things went. And that's what
yeah,
sometimes I think can be the missing link is sometimes there's this impression of like, you wanted it all thrown out the out the window. Like, no, of course you were open and wanting to be monitored. And of course, you want to be safe and you want your heart to do okay during labor. You just didn't
Yes.
want to make assumptions that it was going to be worst case scenario. And so why couldn't we kind of take it step by step versus kind of throwing in the towel before we were even there?
Yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, you guys aren't recommending a C-section. You're just recommending, kind of in my mind as a first-time mom, the words vacuum and forceps seemed very scary,
Yeah,
very kind of worst case scenario, and very like emergency. We only use this. It doesn't seem
right.
like a part of a birth plan in my mind as a first-time mom, never going through it, never, it was terrifying.
Absolutely. And you had the stories and history of your mom's birth stories as well, where
Yes.
that was not a part of the plan. It wasn't a part of the births.
No,
Um,
she had 6 babies.
right,
My mom had 6 babies.
right. You were like,
So
can she have a seat at this table?
right. So, um, yeah, so I was very distraught, and I had, actually conversations with my mom, and I had
Mhm,
multiple conversations with my OB at the time, and then I was just I knew in my gut that this didn't feel right,
mhm,
and at this point, I'm probably 32 weeks, maybe. I'm still talking about it, still not feeling good, still, starting to get stressed because it's getting closer to the end of
mhm,
pregnancy. And I started just having more conversations with friends. And I knew that my friend Cassie had used a doula and had
mhm,
raved about her.
mhm.
And so I talked to her
Love her.
about you, Stephanie. And she was like, you need to reach out. You just need to reach out. And I'm like, but it's so far along and blah, blah, blah. So I sent you an email
Yeah.
and you I don't even remember when I hired you. Do you remember how far along I was?
I know I could look back, but I feel like it was probably
I
May-ish because I remember taking the kids, it was like their last day of school, and that was, I think, right when we kind of were making the shift for providers, and so that was kind of
Yeah.
early on. So a couple of
Yeah.
months, but what really and this is why I always tell people to reach out. Like even if somebody is uncertain about hiring a birth doula or they kind of in the back of their mind think it's not for them or whatever the circumstances, Cassie had sent me a text message, I think either right before or right after you had emailed. And the thing that like makes my stomach hurt is when I hear from moms and their response is, I feel like I'm not being heard.
Yeah.
And
And
it is
that
like, that's not okay. That's not okay.
no.
And that was like, let's get on a call. And I tell people that all the time, even if I'm not the right fit, if How to Mom's not the right fit, if hiring a birth doula is not the right fit, like that's okay. But let's get on a call so that we can at least explore and we can answer some questions for you.
Yeah. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but I did interview a doula before you.
Oh no, I did not.
Yeah, and it wasn't the right fit.
You just know. You
I
know.
knew. And so that's maybe why I waited so long even to reach out to you, but
Mhm.
I reached out to you and we talked on a Zoom call and I did finally feel heard. I
Mm,
was like, she's listening to me. And that's what I told my husband because my husband was like, I have no idea what a doula is.
right.
So I
He's
was
not
like,
alone.
right. So I was like, I just feel heard. Like, I feel like she is going to help me feel heard through the whole process. Because
Mhm.
even an hour-long Zoom conversation with you, first meeting you, I actually think it went longer than an hour, but
Tends to
I,
happen, but I love
yeah,
it.
but I felt heard finally. And I think I cried. And so um, I hired you pretty quickly and
We started working right away.
we started working. And I think the first thing that we talked about was the possibility of finding a provider who would hear me.
Mhm,
And I reached out to, you gave me a list of midwives and
mhm,
OBs.
mhm,
And I did reach out to midwives, but because of my heart condition,
mhm,
I was considered high risk. So
mhm.
no midwives would take me, which was a bummer, but we
Mhm,
pivoted.
mhm,
And I found Dr.
mhm,
Hallman,
mhm.
who I loved.
I
I
know.
was unsure about him at first, but I
I was like,
loved,
"Just trust me."
yes. But I loved him, and I drove quite a ways to see him. I drove
Yes, you did.
an hour to see him, but in my mind, again, I felt heard and I felt taken
Mhm.
care of. And to me, that was the most important. I didn't want to go into labor and delivery feeling,
Like, you couldn't trust your provider, and that's we talk with clients about that all the time, and that doesn't guarantee any situation, but what it does do is it allows us to surrender during our birth journey, and we are literally putting our trust into somebody else's hands because
Mhm,
they know us, they know our wishes, they've listened to what's important to us, and the reason why Hallman was on that list that I sent you is because there are certain providers, when something is medically necessary, they are going to take care of business and they are going to make sure that you
mhm,
are safe and you are healthy, and so is your baby. And I have trust in him for that. But what I also knew about him and why I thought he would potentially be a good fit is because he wasn't going to do anything unless it was necessary. And that,
mhm.
I think, is what you were looking for and striving for is yes, if we're in a situation and this is necessary, or you're suggesting something that is going to make me and my son the healthiest we can be, of course we're open to that. But we
Mhm.
didn't what the conversations that we had is you didn't want things to be done just to be done, just to check a box.
Yes. And when I went in to meet Dr. Holman, I explained to him all of the things, and he was just kind of sitting there writing things down and listening. And I was like, oh gosh, this guy thinks I'm, you know, I'm like, what is even going through this guy's head? He's just writing things, he's not saying anything. And I talk. So
Yeah.
I was just talking. And in the end, he was like, he asked me for a couple tests, I think. And
Yep.
he's like, send me these tests that you've done. I'll see how your heart checks out, but I don't see any reason why you can't do this. And I
Yeah.
was like, what?
Yeah.
Okay. So at 36 weeks pregnant, I switched to Dr. Holtman and I delivered at Woodwinds, which was an hour away from my
Yeah.
house. But
But I
it was
think what is so like groundbreaking about that is you guys, she was 36 weeks pregnant. I think sometimes, right, based out of fear or uncertainty, or just like, I don't know, is it too late? We want to have this established relationship. But at any point in your pregnancy, if you are feeling unheard and you are like, I have a bad gut feeling, like this intuition is strong and we need to listen to it. And Mercedes called me after that first visit and she's like, I feel really good about it. There were some scenarios we talked through. We talked about the distance. And she was like, I'm gonna switch. And I was like, if you feel in your gut like this is the right fit and the right move, let's do it. And that's what's so cool is I just want other moms to hear this if they're listening right now and they've had this icky weird feeling or this intuition and they kind of keep pushing it away because they're just like, oh, there's not enough time or it's just impossible. I want you guys to hear this. Like Mercedes made all of these changes and all of these choices later on in pregnancy. And I guess a big question, and I think I know the answer to this, but just like, do you regret any of those decisions or listening to that intuition?
not at all. And I think after that phone call with you, when I said I'm going to switch, I finally felt relaxed. Like I felt like I could
To
relax my
breathe.
shoulders, that I could breathe. I wasn't
Mhm,
tense anywhere anymore. My mind
mhm,
could quit. I was thinking hard about the delivery room. I was like,
mhm.
before switching, I was just imagining kind of fighting with my provider during
Yeah,
delivery. And I was like, that is not, I want it to be calm and peaceful. And I'm already kind of a high strung person. So
yeah,
I need like the complete opposite end of the
yeah,
spectrum to kind of level me out.
yeah,
So I finally felt like I could breathe and I
yeah.
felt calm going into it. And then you and I immediately started doing more things, and you gave me affirmation cards. And
Mhm.
um, so I just felt like I could really start prepping. And I think from 36 weeks on, I went to 40 and 5.
Mhm.
Um, so those last, 4 or 5 weeks, I
Mhm.
just could focus on prepping my body.
All right, you guys, we're just going to take a brief break so that I can tell you all about one of How to Mom's favorite go to brands and products. Earth Mama Organics formulates and creates organic and natural herbal pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding, and baby care products. We believe that they are one of the best and the safest personal care products on the market for both you and for baby. You can follow the link in our bio, or you can go to howtomom.com/links. Follow the Earth Mama Organics link and enter How to Mom for your promotional code to receive 15% off. All right, now back to today's show. Yeah. And kind of letting your mind go to that place of hope and excitement and
Yeah.
envisioning, being in a calm, trusting environment to welcome this little adorable little boy. So
Yeah.
let's talk about his birth. So obviously we worked
Okay.
together. We did all the prep work. We worked on the birth plan. We talked through the options, all of the things that we do with our clients. But I would love for you to tell them Bodhi's story and kind of how it started and walk us through his birth.
Okay. Well, it started kind of funny.
Yeah, I love this.
I was far along, and I was uncomfortable, and I was ready.
Yes.
And no matter how many conversations you and I had about calming and, just trying to continue to do things and get my mind
Mhm.
off of it, I
It's very hard.
decided it is very hard.
Yes.
I actually had a friend whose due date was, let's see here, mine was the 15th and hers was the 25th. So we had due dates 10 days apart. And we had heard about this. It's called the labor inducer, and it is a burger at a restaurant in Excelsior, Minnesota.
Love
And
it.
the restaurant for moms who are looking for it is called the Suburban. And there had been something like 70, I think, well, not to jump the gun, but Bodhi was number 78 to eat. The
Are
rule
you guys
is that
officially
you,
on the wall?
yeah, his
Oh my
picture's on
gosh,
the
you
wall.
have to
Yeah.
send me a picture.
Okay. We haven't gone back, but that's something we
I
need to do.
love it.
But anyways, so whatever secret sauce ingredients is on this burger
Mhm.
sends women into labor. And there's news stories on it actually,
Yep.
and it's quite hilarious. But me and my friend went in there and ate the burger. We ate it at 7 o'clock,
Mhm.
and I came home and was just going about my night, and Bodhi was kicking like crazy in my tummy, and I thought it was hilarious. My husband and I were watching TV. I don't even remember what we were watching, just relaxing. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so full. He's moving around like crazy. Um, and I was getting to the place where I was like, I'm going to start trying everything. So we started
Mhm.
talking about having sex. And I was like, all right,
Mhm.
I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and we can attempt to have sex, even though it was
Yes,
the last thing I wanted to do.
I know.
But
Anytime I bring that up with clients, they look at me and I'm like, I know. Been
it
there,
was
done
not,
that.
yeah, it was not on my radar. But I was like, I want this baby
Whatever.
here.
Yes,
Yeah.
whatever we could do.
So I came upstairs, brushed my teeth, sat down on the toilet to go to the bathroom, and my water broke
Crazy.
on the toilet. Um,
Talk about convenience.
yeah. Well, that first part of it,
Yeah,
anyways. And
initial.
so my water broke. I called for Joel, and Joel, my husband, and he came running up, and he's like, okay, what do we do? Where are hospital bags? Well, I'm like, calm down, calm down. I started taking the garbage out. I started getting things prepped, grabbing the last minute things for my hospital bag.
Yep.
And my water continued to leak. And I was like, all right, I texted you. We were in in communication, and you told me to try to get some rest. So I think finally started getting rest at like maybe midnight ish.
Mhm.
And I was not having any contractions. I think I lost my mucus plug when my water
Mhm.
broke. But other than that, I was really having no signs of labor. So um, I tried to get some rest, and I woke up at 1:30 with contractions
Amazing.
and went to the bathroom, and I was having a little bit of blood.
Mhm.
And you told me that all was good, all was normal. So I just continued to rest. Couldn't really sleep, but I rested and woke up at 2:30, and there was still a little too much blood for my liking and for
Mhm.
your liking. So
Mhm.
I called Woodwinds and they told me to come in. Well, I said it was an hour drive, and she kind of scared me, and she was like, "Where's your closest hospital? You either need to go or get an ambulance." And I was like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
Okay. So the closest hospital is only 10 minutes away. So we went into Laconia Hospital and I got checked out, but I had no idea who any of the providers were there.
Right.
It was just kind of an emergency, middle of the night, 3 a.m. situation.
Right.
Um, and we talked about, you know, getting Bodhi checked out just in case
Yep.
something, when my water broke, things changed, and everything checked out. Everything was fine. I was dilated to a 3, and I told them I wanted to go.
Well, and I was just going to say too, I'm so glad that you said that because, of course, as a doula, right, we have no medical background. And so when a client calls us and there might be things that are a little bit outside of normal or some concerns that mom or dad have, obviously our number one suggestion, right, is we always want to check in with our provider, see what
Mhm.
their thoughts are. Of course, if they are suggesting that you come in to be checked out, or like you said, like even to get Bodhi on the monitors a little bit, see how he's
Yeah.
reacting to your waters releasing. Um, and I think that's always a great step. I think what was so beautiful in what you did and kind of what we talked about even leading up to his journey is that we can always, of course, go in and get checked out, whether it's, you know, decrease in fetal movement or there's more bleeding than I think was, is considered normal range or like these factors, you can always go in and get checked out. And we should feel safe to be able to go in and get checked out. But then we should also be in a position, if all is well, I want clients to know and just the community to know at any point you can say, okay, I'm ready to go back home and labor in my environment. And you did such a good job at that. Instead of making decisions based out of fear, it's like, let's collect some data. Let's see how
Yeah.
we're doing and then make a decision from there. And I just was so proud of you to say, all is well. I want to go back home.
Yeah. And, the nurse actually had to go ask if that was even allowed. She had never
Had
obviously
somebody.
experienced that. So I was like, I'm out of here. This is not where I'm delivering.
Right. This is not,
So,
yes. If all is well, we are out of here.
right.
Yes.
So went back home. You gave me some positions to lie in to continue to rest. We had because I was driving an hour, we
Yes.
talked about having my contractions being about 10 minutes apart consistently for an hour, and then we would make the drive.
Yes.
Well, love my husband, but he's not an attention to detail kind of a guy.
Love him.
So I was having contractions, and sometimes they were starting to get pretty painful to the
Yeah.
point where I was like, um, I started asking him for the time. Well, he was looking at the time on the clock on the bedside table, not like the iPhone,
Yes.
everybody has the same exact time clock.
Right.
So I think when we finally realized this, it was like um either I think it was like 7:30 or 8:30 in the morning.
Yep.
And I texted you and I was like, no, pretty sure my contractions are like 6 minutes apart consistently.
Yeah.
And we're gonna head towards the hospital.
Good idea.
Well, at this point, it was a Wednesday morning, right?
Mhm.
Wednesday morning. And it was, we hit traffic. We hit rush hour traffic
Of
on the
course. I mean,
way
they were
to
coming
Woodbury.
across town, you guys.
Yes. So from West Waconia to Woodbury.
East. Yep.
And that was not a fun car ride. It was
Intense.
bumpy. It was slow. Um, we talked about trying hands and knees position. I was like, my belly was bouncing on the, it was rough. Got there, got to Woodbury finally. I threw up in the parking lot because I think that just the intensity
Absolutely. That
of it.
shift. Your
Yeah.
body's working so hard.
Yeah. And I got in and we got upstairs, I think. And
Somehow.
where were we? I don't even know. And the nurses were like, "Are you in labor?" And I'm like, "Uh-huh." And we
Yeah.
went in and they checked me and I was dilated to 7.
Amazing. Look at all that work you did at home.
Yeah.
And
At
I
home
mean,
and in the car.
incredible. And in the car. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking a lot of contractions in that car ride versus like a
Mhm.
10-minute drive where you just have to kind of get through a couple.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
That is
um,
okay. So you guys, so when she was in the hospital the night before, or I guess
yeah,
early
well,
mornings
yeah,
with
3
pneumonia,
a.m. Yep.
she was dilated to a 3. She was able to go home, obviously not get into any type of deep sleep, but rest, meaning
Yeah.
she was able to let her body melt into her bed. We were able to position her legs in a way so that her pelvis was still open, so that while her body was doing all of this work and Bodhi, he had room to navigate her pelvis and to continue to put that pressure on her cervix. And so I just think it's all easier said than done, but to be able to do that work in the comfort of your own home while you're able to rest without multiple interruptions can be a game changer in how our birth goes and the amount of interventions that we are
Yes.
introduced to. So I'm going to stop us here for 1 minute. We're going to take a quick break because now Mercedes is at the hospital and ready to go full force into active labor with her support team, and we'll jump right back in. All right, you guys, we are back with Mercedes, who is sharing her beautiful birth story with all of us. We're so lucky to be here today to listen to this story. So, Mercedes is at the part in her story where she gets to the hospital and she is definitely in active labor. I'm assuming they initially brought you into triage, I believe, correct? Yeah,
I don't
probably.
know.
She's like, I was working really hard.
I don't know.
But the room scenario is a part of the story. So I
Yes.
will let you take it from here. So she successfully labors through this hour plus drive.
Yep.
Luckily, I guess it was summer. We would have been in a very different scenario
Yeah.
here in the winter months. But so she's at the hospital. The nurse checks her and she is dilated to 7 centimeters.
Yes. So I think at that point they kind of started well, not panicking, but rushing. They were like, "Okay, she's in active labor. We got to go."
Right.
So they asked me if I wanted the tub filled up. I said yes. They put an IV in my arm. They had to do a COVID swab, so they did that, which is also part of the story.
Yes.
Um, and they were just, getting me going. I was still chatting with the nurse. I was still doing okay. I was chatting. And throughout all of this, you got there.
Mhm.
So we were just, getting settled into the hospital.
Yes.
And they read my chart and realized that I was what they call heart mom, and that I needed to be on the telemonitor, which is just that extra monitoring. And the room that I was in couldn't like reach the signal. They watched me from the room or from the
I think they were like one level upstairs.
yeah, they were
And
just
they did
upstairs.
try. I felt like they tried a couple of times, like, oh, maybe we can get it to connect.
Yeah.
Like they were kind of trying, but it
Yeah.
was not successful.
Yeah. It was not successful. So they were like, okay, we have to walk down the hall. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay.
While in active labor, like actively
Yes.
laboring every 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I think I quickly got to like an 8,
Hmm.
during this process.
Yes.
So I'm in active labor and I'm like, we're going. And the nurse is like, do you want a robe? And I'm like, no, let's go.
I'm in between. Let's go.
So we walked down the hallway. I don't even remember. Um, a ton of it. But the funny part of the story is that there's apparently a cute acupuncturist that works there. And apparently I walked right past him. The nurse was so funny. Once I was finally out of this whole don't even know where I am stage, she was like, "You walked right past the cute acupuncturist." It was so funny.
So
So I get to my new room and they tell me that I tested positive for COVID.
mhm,
So my mom was there. She was in the waiting room, just kind of waiting for Bodhi to be born. The initial plan was to just have you and Joel in the room.
mhm,
And so they sent my mom home. They said
mhm.
no visitors in and out. The nurses had to kind of get that extra PPE on, and we kept on going.
Yeah.
And I quickly got to a 9,
Mhm.
and I was at a 9 for quite a while. And once I had the telemonitor on, um, they wouldn't let me in the water. So that was kind of a part of our birth plan, was to not to deliver in the water, but to labor in the water to help me relax.
Which we
So
had talked to the provider about that
yes.
as well. But unfortunately, because Mercedes was so patient, right? And we knew that if we could enter labor spontaneously, that we could minimize the amount of interventions.
Yeah.
But that meant that it landed on
Dr. Hallman's vacation.
Dr. He doesn't go often, but
No.
it happened to be that same time frame. And I also want people to know too, it's been obviously a hard thing for everybody to navigate through COVID times, especially with hospitals and visitors and doulas and things of that nature. And I do remember at one point just feeling obviously like mama bear. They kind of looked at me, and I know, right, in my line of work that if there is a positive COVID patient, that they do not have access to a birth doula. Um, do
Oh, I
you
didn't
not
know
know
that.
this?
No. Were
Okay.
they gonna kick you out? Were they trying to kick you out?
They looked at me and we all knew what that meant. And in hopefully a very professional manner, I said, which I had already been with you for some time. I
Yes.
said, I'm not leaving. Like I'm already here. I'm not leaving.
Well,
Um
and the part of the story I think that is important too is that I had
right.
COVID 2 months prior.
Right.
And so the protocol is that if you've had COVID within 90 days, that's the question that they're supposed to ask before they swab you.
Exactly. So
So
initially, she should have never even been swabbed. And so, again, to respect everybody and to make sure everybody is safe, of course, there's protocols in place that need to be followed, and that makes sense. And as a professional, I want to respect. But we were in a different scenario in this moment. And once
yes.
that was all kind of shuffled through and figured out, it was like, okay, yes, no, that swab should have never even taken place. The only reason why
Yes.
she was testing positive is because she had had it within 90 days. We were able to show that. And so thank
Yes. So
goodness we're
they
able to
talked.
continue.
Yes. Yep. So they ended up talking to infectious control, and all of my
Yes.
restrictions were lifted.
Yes.
So my mom actually got to come back eventually, but
But one of those like roller coaster of emotions of things
yeah.
that kind of happen within our birth journeys that, we don't necessarily process in the moment, but definitely when we look back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I didn't know, I didn't know the protocols. I didn't know anything. I didn't know that they were trying to kick you out. So um yeah, so we just started doing all of the things.
Mhm.
Bodhi was high in the birth canal. He was high in the birth canal in all my previous checks as well. That was something that you and I were working on prior to um, going into labor, and we were working on it still.
Yep. We did a
Um,
lot and the nurses were really great in helping us
oh my gosh.
figure out exactly where Bodhi was. And that helps with families and birth teams and figuring out what positions are best in what moment so that we can utilize these contractions and make them as effective as possible so that hopefully moms don't have to go through as many of them. And Mercedes, she was just open and down for whatever I suggested. At one point, we had the squat bar and she was in a deep lunge, super low, kind of hanging with all of the strength in her arms. Just whatever position we could do to just help him navigate that pelvis and get lower. Cause we knew once that happened, we were going to be having a baby. It's just he needed a little bit of help to kind of get as low as possible and to continue dilating that cervix. But you were
Yeah.
such a trooper. You were just like, I mean, no, I don't want to get in that position, but if you're telling me that it will do
Yeah.
something, I will do it. And I was like,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. That is exactly. I was like, I think you said, I think you did say, do you want to switch to this? And I kept saying, no, but I'll do it if you
Yes.
think it'll
That was
help.
exactly your response. You're like, well, no, that doesn't sound great, but if you're telling me it will help me have this baby, I will listen to you. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, let's just do a couple in this position.
So I think we tried almost all of the positions possible.
We did do a lot.
Um, I think you even whipped out your book at one point and you were like,
Mhm.
we got to try other things. The nurses were incredible. My one nurse in particular, her name is Brittany, and I will never forget her. You and her, she was right on board with you, helping. I mean,
Yeah,
it
she
was
was
great.
great.
So I felt not only very supported by you with changing positions and the nurses and you and your affirmations and helping Joel, my husband,
Yes.
which he still to this day jokes that next pregnancy, if and when that happens, it's just going to be you and I. He's not going to be there.
He's way too much fun to not have in that room though.
I know, I know. So, after I think like 5 or 6 hours of trying, I
Mhm.
was at a 9.5
Mhm.
and I was feeling quite defeated. And the doctor, which we ended up switching providers at this point,
Mhm.
came in and she no, this was the first doctor. She checked me and she said, okay, you're at a 9.5. You just have a little bit of an anterior lip. I can hold the anterior lip and we can attempt to push.
Mhm.
So we tried a round of pushing and she was like, here's the deal. He's still high in the birth canal. We can do this now if you want to, but you're probably going to be pushing for 2 to 3 hours. And everything in your chart says they don't want you to push for a long time. They want to use the vacuum and forceps. She knew that I didn't want that. And she said, or your other option would be to get an epidural and to labor down. So I had a hard decision to make.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I'm going to cry thinking about it. Ultimately, the vacuum and forceps was my worst case scenario. I think I would have personally rather had a C-section than had those scary forms of intervention.
Right.
So, and I was having contractions, every minute for a minute? Like it was nonstop. I
Yeah.
was exhausted. I was
Absolutely.
exhausted.
And you had been working all night.
Oh, yeah. And was, dilated to a 6 or to a 9 for like
A long
6
time.
hours. So I was almost at the end of my rope and we decided to do the epidural, which was scary because I have a lot of spinal cord injury things in my,
Mhm.
I had this kind of trauma shield around the epidural. And
Absolutely.
so we had to talk through that, which you were helpful for again.
Well, and I
And
think too, so a lot of people know for their future birth journeys is there are some moments where some hard conversations have to take place and we have to ask for space and time to think and time to process. And at that point, you were doing well. Bodhi was doing well medically. Everybody was healthy.
yes,
And so to take a minute and to breathe and to process with everything that's kind of going on in that moment and to just kind of regroup or rebalance and just say, what is information that would be helpful right now for you to make this decision? Helping patients and or clients weigh the risk versus benefits. Like you just said, it was not an easy decision. It took a lot of courage. It took a lot of processing. But we also knew from the work that we had been doing for the past couple of months that a vaginal birth definitely was a low intervention vaginal birth was a high priority,
Yeah.
not using the tools to deliver, and to have in a calm environment. And we knew that Dr. Hallman was open to pushing without aid if her heart was looking good, but we also knew the likelihood of that decreased with the amount of time. So we were balancing
Mhm.
time versus energy versus interventions. And so we
Mhm.
had to like sit in that room together as a group and really weigh out all of those options and talk about it. Not that any decision is right or wrong or easy to make, but because I felt like Joel was there and the beautiful conversation you had with your mom on the phone, and just feeling like you were allowed to gather the information and then make a decision that even though it wasn't easy, it was like, I want to be able to push this baby out. And I know that I can do it, but I know the percentage of me doing it is a lot higher if it's not a 2 to 3 hour occurrence.
Yes.
Hey guys, it's Stephanie Sinclair, founder and owner of How2Mom. I'm just interrupting today's episode to make sure you are well aware of all that How2Mom offers. We, of course, are a community and a support group for all moms at all stages of life, but we also offer a large variety of services that I wanted to make sure you are well aware of. We offer birth doula services, both in person or online support. We have birth support groups with different birth packages to choose from. We also provide placenta encapsulation services, lactation services from our lactation counselors. We also offer postpartum services, birth planning assistance, belly casting. We have a registered dietitian, nutritionist. We also offer a variety of photography services from birth, newborn, and family packages. We truly have it all here at How2Mom. So please don't hesitate to reach out today to have a free consult and help us find the best way to support you in your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Now back to today's episode. So there was just there was a lot to weigh in that moment. And it felt it's very vulnerable. It's a vulnerable place to be. Absolutely. And feeling safe and feeling like you can really express yourself in that moment, I think can make a big difference for families.
Yeah. And I think that also is I've had a friend recently ask me what the biggest, like, why she thought, like, why was your doula the most helpful, or what was like the most helpful moment of having a doula? And mine was probably the decision making, just you helping me talk through and making me feel heard and like I was important and mattered. Because, I think that the only real thing that we have in our minds of birth is what you see on TV.
It's so true. It's so
Right?
true. And it's
With
so
women
not accurate.
screaming and and it's just so I had to kind of rewrite what labor looked like, and you helped me do that. So I did end
love
up
that.
calling my mom at that moment. You brought that up. So I called my mom, and one thing that my mom said too was, Mercedes, you said that you were open to anything, and getting an epidural isn't wrong. You were open to anything as long as it keeps you and baby safe and healthy. And the end goal was no tools and a vaginal birth. So we made the decision.
Yes.
And little did I know, it takes a little while. It's not just like you make the decision and you're home free. So you had to also help me through that, because I was like, when is she gonna be here? And you were like, you've been doing this a long time. And I think what you said to me was, sometimes when we know the end game is coming, we have a shift in our mind. And that is 100% what happened. I was like, my pain level increased. I was, not doing as well through contractions. And so you kind of helped get me back in check, I guess.
Well, it is really
Mhm.
interesting, and I remember that even from my personal experiences. Yeah, once you make that decision and relief is coming, and you've processed and you are sitting well with that decision, you're like, okay, this is the plan. Our mind does do something tricky where all of a sudden our coping mechanisms aren't as strong, right? Because we're like, oh, I've surrendered, I've asked for help, and now where is it? And so
Yeah.
yeah, that can be a big pivotal moment where these mamas need a lot of support because they are saying, I need something. I've made that decision, and now we can kind of spiral a little bit there. So yeah, we have to reground and say, okay, that relief is coming, but right now our focus is still breathing through each contraction until we feel that relief. Because yes, it takes time, not only for them to get
Yes.
there, they have to do fluid. There's just a lot
Yes.
of yeah.
And that was a part of my hurt too, is that I did not get the immediate saline that a lot of moms
That's true. Yes.
get. So they had to give me, they didn't even give me the full amount of saline, but they had to give me some in order to
Right.
get the epidural. So that process took time. And
Yes.
so it finally happened. And you were like, okay. Well, first you wanted me to eat or drink, try to eat and drink. And I was nauseous throughout the entire time. So that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And then you said, now, when you get the epidural and when it starts kicking in, I want you to rest so that your body can be prepped for
Yes.
pushing.
Yes.
And I was a ball of energy after I got that epidural. I
Do you
think
remember what Joel said to the nurse?
to Brittany, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
and now you've met my wife or
Yes.
something like that.
He's like, oh, there's my wife. He was like, I don't know where she went for a while, but this is Mercedes.
Yeah, I was talking. I mean,
Yeah.
I was very grateful for the epidural in that
Heck
moment.
yeah. Yes.
But we didn't stop. You still put me in with the peanut ball and sideline positions, and they were monitoring. And I think I labored down for 2 hours. Was it 2 hours?
Yeah, I think so.
And contractions slowed down, everything slowed down. But I was finally ready to push at around 6:15. And
And
I
baby was a
pushed.
lot lower, a lot lower.
Yes.
Hmm.
And the doctor came in. I was ready to push, and the doctor came in. This is a different doctor that had initially said, we can push, it'll take 2 to 3 hours. New doctor, shift change. And she again brought up the vacuum forceps, said, we're ready to push. This is what's in your chart, vacuum and forceps. And I looked at you and I was just like, I think I just felt so defeated.
Mm.
And you just came in right when I just looked at you, and you were like, Mercedes and Dr. Hallman had an understanding that she was going to try. And I don't even remember how you said it, but you finessed it very well. And I felt in that moment brave enough and safe enough to just say to the doctor,
Mhm.
can I at least try?
Just let me try.
Just let me try.
Mhm.
And her response was, absolutely.
I know. I was like, oh, thank God.
Me too. I
Like
was
in
like,
that moment, I
whoa.
was like, okay, I think we're feeling a little bit frustrated right now because
Yes.
there's been a lot of work to get her to this point. And
Yes.
there's a reason why we are at this hospital and within this
Yes.
group. And
Yes.
she listened to both of us.
Yes.
And
And I was
she
nervous.
was
She was a little bit sterner
Mhm.
than Dr. Hallman or even the previous doctor.
Yes, very much so.
Stern and very still nice, but
Yeah.
just more stern. And I was like,
Yeah.
uh-oh.
I know.
But
I
she was
know.
great.
Yes.
And I just, I said, if anything happens with my heart or with Bodhi's heart, because they, he was having a little bit of D cells.
Yeah.
And I said, then we can then we can talk again, but I want to try.
Exactly. Yes.
So she let me try, and I pushed on my back and everything was fine. And I pushed for an hour
Mhm.
and he was here.
With your mom in the room.
with my mom in the room. My mom came in the room after I called her. I was like, "Just come."
Come.
It was a need my mom moment.
And it was so great, and she just like you said, she said all the right things, and she was so respectful, like, she was there, but
Yes.
she was just watching, you
Yeah,
know? It
she
was
was.
just and I think everybody in the room, I mean, everybody was just celebrating and overjoyed and just like, "You did it. You
Yeah.
did it with no
Another thing that
tools."
I feel like I really wanna mention is
Yeah.
it was shift change, and we switched nurses,
Mhm.
and Brittany,
Mhm.
who I would hope that she would listen to this at some point, but she was like she was like, "Okay, guys, it's, shift change. It's time for, whoever was taking over." I don't even remember that nurse's name, but both Joel and I were like, "Okay, bye, Brittany." And she goes, "I'm not leaving you." She stayed and she
Yeah, she
watched and she
did.
was there. And
She was invested.
yeah.
Yes, she
And
wanted to
it
celebrate.
just it felt like I got to have a not so hospital birth in a
Mhm,
hospital.
mhm,
And I think that you were a part of that. I think where I chose to deliver was a part of that. I think my specific nurse was a
mhm,
part of that.
mhm.
I think the doctors within the group, were also a part of that. Now, would I have hoped that Dr. Hallman would have been there 100%? But I think that it still worked out
Yeah.
just fine. And the doctor that delivered Bodhi ended up being great. She let me feel his
Mhm.
head.
Yes.
Um, I could still feel quite a bit. So I was really intentionally breathing even in between contractions. Um,
Absolutely.
and he was moving. I mean, he moved out great. I ended
He
up not
played a
even
huge role.
caring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it was great.
Well, and I want you to know, and I want all our listeners to know, it was also the start of you listening to your intuition, following your gut, doing the work of the things that were within your control, finding a provider that you felt safe with, gathering a team that made you feel empowered and that you and Bodhi got to lead us on this journey. We were just there to support and surround you in love. You made the decisions. You were brave and courageous and strong enough to advocate and to speak up and to share your wishes. And I think at the end of the day, that is a game changer for families. That doesn't mean that Bodhi did not, that his birth story didn't have twists and turns and emotions and
Yeah.
highs and lows, because that is a part of it. It's this transformation, this transformative experience for not only your baby, but also you and for you and Joel as partners. And if we are able to handle the things that are within our control and stack the things in our favor, it's not about exactly how we birth or the choices that we make when we're vulnerable in labor, but rather how
Mhm.
we're made to feel. And
Mhm.
all of those things led up to Bodhi's birth and
Yeah.
made it what it was. And just having that strength in that moment of being at 9.5 centimeters for that long, which can feel extremely defeating and
Yes.
could have easily been a scenario with a different provider or a different hospital or with parents that didn't have the knowledge, um, or the support that they deserve to say, okay, I guess this isn't working. Um, and then even in that moment of like, oh my gosh, we got here and we're starting to push, and the doctor sits down, who, like you said, yes, she was great.
Mhm.
There was nothing where I felt like we weren't safe to say how we were feeling in that moment.
No.
But kind of she was just more so, I read the chart, here I am, this is the plan. And we're like,
Yeah.
no, that's not the plan.
Well, and it's also intimidating, right? They're doctors. They're
Yep.
in our minds, they're the people that know it all that we're
Yep.
supposed to listen to and we're supposed to. But I think through the whole process, I realized that actually they're working for us and we
Exactly.
do have a voice and we do have a say in things.
Mhm.
So even during pushing when Bodhi had to get the monitor placed in his scalp,
Yep.
and I heard of it maybe in a book, and
Yep.
I looked at you. and you told me what it was. And then I looked at the doctor and I was like, I'm the type of person, and I said this right to her. I said, I'm the
You
type of
did.
person that needs to be, I need step by step. I said, how are you going to do this?
Exactly.
And she said, I place my fingers, it slides right in. It's pretty normal. And my mom told me all of us had it.
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, yeah, I can breathe again. So it it is, I think, important to know that you can use your voice.
Yes. And tell them
And
what you need, what helps you
yeah,
process, what helps make you feel empowered, because it's going to be different for everybody. And if
yeah,
we feel like we have the support to do that, and if doctors are listening, it's just better for everybody. I mean,
yeah,
it's going to be different for everybody, but it's going to be better for everybody. And so
yeah,
I'm so proud of you. It was such a beautiful experience. Like I said, just the courage and the strength, and really just listening to your body and letting that guide all of us.
yeah.
Waiting, 40 plus 5, even when you're like, oh, like really, I would rather have this baby outside of my belly right now.
Right.
But now being able to look back and process and see kind of how it unfolded, um, that helps to kind of put all the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
Yes. Is there anything else that you would want to share, or information you would want to give our listeners who might be preparing for birth? Maybe they are looking for guidance or help from those who have come before them. It doesn't have to be doula related, birth related. I mean, just any last piece of advice you would give a brand new mom who is sitting in your shoes that you were in early 2022.
Mhm.
What would you want to leave them with?
No, I have recently found a mom company, because you start following all of the mom things.
Absolutely.
And their slogan is to use your voice, even if it shakes.
Oh,
And I got the chills just now, but I think that
mhm.
that is such an empowering throughout pregnancy, throughout labor and delivery, throughout being a new mom and having to make so many decisions that you have no idea
Left and
what
right.
you're doing.
I know.
Just to use your voice, and you are you and your baby's advocate. So,
I love that. That is so beautiful. I've never heard
yeah.
that. I love
Yeah.
that. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your story and Bodhi's story with us. I know that so many people are walking away from this episode today feeling empowered, feeling like the next time they go into their appointment, that they have the courage to ask the questions and to get the support that they deserve. Because I believe that was one thing I said to you that very first Zoom meeting was, Mercedes, you deserve support.
Yeah.
And I am just honored to have been the one who could be there for that journey. And thank you just for sharing your story with this community. And thank you all for listening. I know that you got some warm fuzzies while doing that today, because it's a pretty beautiful, beautiful story. So thanks, Mercedes.
Thank you. I'll
All right,
never
you
be
guys,
able
we
to
will.
thank you. No.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, I'll never be able to thank you enough, because you you helped me become a mama.
You have, and you do. And I'm excited to see all of the women that you get to help in this process as well. So thanks for listening, you guys. We will chat with you during our next episode. All right, you guys, that is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. If so, please subscribe to our podcast, comment, share, give us feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen, and we will see you next time.